All right, let's continue now with more materials. I have shared some pictures on the group. These are slightly different than regular materials. It's more like texture that I want to explore. And I've sent two sets of images. One is baskets and the other is shoelaces. No, rope. And there's another third one, shoelaces, which I haven't sent right now. I thought we'd do it at a later stage. But essentially, if we look at materials, there are all sorts of finishes on top. We have we have done two finishes or three finishes. One is transparent objects, which is again smooth. Metal objects, also smooth. Yesterday we did fabric, which is smooth but has got a very unpredictable texture depending upon how it folds. And now taking that further, we are now going into more texture. So this is often, we often come across it in textiles or in things like rope, which again is made out of yarn. Sometimes it can also be seen in metal, but made into a texture. So you might see wires that have been woven, or you might see something like chain links, which is also kind of a texture which goes into each other. Then you have something like a wire mesh, which is also a texture. So what I'm focusing on right now is any material that can be made into some kind of a length and then treated in some way or another. So depending upon what material we use, its presentation will change. If we use metal, then obviously we would have very sharp contrasts and very dark shadows and very well lit highlights. In the case of basket, because that is made from organic material, most organic material does not shine as much. So here we have the texture where you will focus more on the structure of that construction and less on highlights, but a lot on working with lines and creating a feel of what that material is. So I will speak about this a little more in detail when we see the material at hand. So here's a detail of some kind of, I guess, leaf maybe. It could be a banana leaf that is woven or pineapple leaf. There are a lot of baskets made from unusual materials other than the usual bamboo or cane. And in those cases, they would use sometimes the leaf of a plant or the stem of a plant, which is washed and treated and aged and then made tensile so that they can weave it up easily. We'll first sketch this to understand a little bit about drawing the construction of weaves. And then we can attack one of these baskets. I've tried to look for baskets which are monochromatic, not too much of too many colors. Because that color then distracts. So right now I just want to focus on these. I will show you a little bit of construction of these baskets and how to go about doing a very, very detailed texture on all of these. I have seen this work very well when you want to show, say, a basket of fruit, and the fruit might be really boring, but then the basket becomes very interesting, and that can show off the illustration very well. So many years ago, when my daughter was really young, I drew a basket like that for a coat that she had coated. She just looked at that basket of fruit and it looked like something. So I'm going to hunt out that picture and share it with you in a bit. For somebody who was just 3 years or 4 years old, the words she chose were quite interesting. Okay, so we're going to start with this. And then eventually we will move on to ropes as well. So ropes are similar texture. Once you understand how to do baskets, ropes won't be very difficult. And there are different ways in which we can illustrate ropes. This is the knot that I'm hoping to illustrate with you. So we will be drawing mostly the structure, because the texture you'll learn how to do through the basket. All right, let's get on to this picture. So first and foremost, here we can practice proportion. As usual, we will first make a loose frame. The frame will be static from one corner, whichever corner we start from. And then the other two sides can be expanded or contracted depending on how far we want to take the illustration and how our proportions work. So if we look at the proportion of the rectangle itself, I'm drawing a square here. And then I will draw a line at half. So what we get is this kind of a proportion. So roughly speaking, the rectangle we draw will be 1, 2, and this part would be close to 1/4 of the square. So 1 square and 3/4 of that square. Now, this is just a rough estimate. We are not really measuring, but it helps to have some kind of idea of what the proportions of the rectangle would be. Once we have the rectangle, we will, start drawing all of the other things. So we have to divide the rectangle into then 3 parts in which the weave of this material can be drawn easily. So this will be the first part, just creating these blue lines. That's 1 square and 3/4 of the same square. The line in the middle and distributing the space. After this is done, we will mark a different proportion. Here there's a little bit of overlap at the bottom. And then further divide the rectangle into more parts. So they start making a grid, and a grid always helps you to understand proportions better. So when you're drawing a line, you can draw it much more confidently. And then we are going to focus on the outline of the entire shape, where to some extent we are going to ignore the shadows. I have taken a screenshot of this. So now I'm going to discard all these lines. And I'm going to show you how to draw the shape. Now, in the center, we have one full shape. So we draw the lines through the middle of the dark shadows. So go right into the shadow. If there is a highlight section, that helps. Draw the whole part. So our lines are all going to make this picture look very bare. It's almost as if we have no makeup on. And once that is done, then we are going to practice shading in these spaces. All right. So the lines have to just be drawn through and through. Make all the shapes first so they fit, and then you will start shading. All right. Let's start.
Aditi, first we make the grid, right?
Yes.
So will you share that picture with the grid?
Yes.
Thanks.
If you have understood how the grid is drawn, then draw with me because I'll be drawing the same thing. So let's decide on the, oh, wait a minute. On the size by determining the width of our drawing. We want to just make it about this large, not too big. And use your pencil or your fingers to mark the vertical point, which is equal to the horizontal dimension. As usual, I'm not insisting on this being too accurate, but at least some sense of measure. Now, before you go to 3/4, first divide the square in half. And then also the top half in half. This way you will automatically get 3/4, and you take the same distance down. And if you draw these lines light enough, you won't even need to erase them as we proceed to draw. Now divide it in half. So the lines that I showed you in the first image, those were how to figure out the proportion. What the lines that I have drawn right now are how to draw the figured out proportions. So in order to get an accurate 1/3 length, it can better be done on the top than at the bottom. At the bottom, when we did this division, I was just trying to figure out how tall the bottom part actually is. Okay, now moving on to the next part. Now, if you feel that you're getting confused between lines, by all means, erase the horizontal lines. Because now we have to divide this into 3 parts. So I know this can be it's a little too much maths. So here's how I do it. It's up to 4 parts. It's pretty easy to divide objects. And if you have the tenacity to, you can divide even further. So I will divide this in half, and half. This makes it 1/4. Visually, I can divide it even further if I divide this into 2 more parts, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. So this is what I wish they had taught us in maths about fractions. I would have been a much better math student, I think. So we are dividing 3 into 4 parts, right? Or 4 into 3 or something like that. Anyway, so this is your half. This is half. And from each of these, we need to remove more parts. So we need 1 part here, 1 part here, and then you have how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So then you do a half over here and half over here, and you get the exact 1/3 measurement. Have you understood this? I will explain again. This is if you want to do it more mathematically. This is 1 full. Half and half. 1/4 and 1/4. Breaking up anything in halves is very easy. So if we want to make this into 3 parts now, I'm going to break the center sections into half and half. So now if I take only the top and the top and 1/4 here, bottom and this, we'll be left with a shorter middle section. So I need to divide this even further. Here, if I take it, then I will have a larger middle section. So now I need to divide this further, and this will be here. Yeah. So I have now divided it equally. This is the most math I can do in pictures. But for our purposes right now, you can literally just visually measure, and that's perfectly fine. Now this gives us an almost even grid. And in this grid, you can start actually from any point that you're comfortable with. So we have one line coming from the top, going through this part and coming straight here. So I'm marking these points and drawing my first line. The next line comes from somewhere just above the middle of the top first section. Okay, just for ease of communication, I'm going to name this A, B, C, and 1, 2, 3, 4. So when I'm referring to a particular block, it's clear. So I've started from A1, gone through A2 into B2, from the other side A1 to B1, and then B2. Is this clear? Yeah, okay, good. All right, now we just proceed with the second grid that I have sent you. And every point will have its corresponding point on all edges and on all edges of each box. So this, there's a second weave that comes from here, takes off a little bit of this corner B3. And now bring this line straight down. I think this is much lower in comparison. So each of these lines you can follow from the grid. Many of you will have had braids in school. So you know how technically it works, how you pull in one loop after another, or one string after another. So the construction won't be a mystery, and the logic neither. In my opinion, a grid and a structure or construction like this is really good to practice recognizing lines on a grid in the first place. Later on, this same grid can be employed on landscape or on a portrait, and you would still be able to see the line for what its meaning is and the purpose it serves, and not get lost in the identity of the object that we are trying to draw. In terms of observation, that's a huge achievement. So as you come towards the right, you might sense that your proportions might be too generous or they might be falling short, don't hesitate to adjust the rectangle to fill up your texture. This is also part of learning. The more details you start putting down on paper, the more firm you are and confident you are about your proportion. If you've drawn your rectangle really dark, you don't even need to extend it. Just leave it at that and we can finish it off. It's okay if the texture is slightly incomplete. Now, once this is made, we can start off with in two ways. One is gently making the texture and then working on the shadows, or we can attack the shadows more aggressively. So I'm using different pencils because my pencils are sharpened differently, but they're all 2B pencil. This one is HB. I don't know why this fellow just keeps coming my way. 2B. So just use a 2B pencil and you can use different pencils if you want. Each of them behaves differently. Once you've finished the structure, go back to the original image. Now that your structure is done, you can just focus on the texture. And there will be a few details in this image that you might have missed because of overlapping grid. There is one line that runs through horizontally over here. There's one over here. And this could be the basal structure on which the weave has been constructed. Now, for those of you who have sweaty palms, here's something that I used and I've not spoken about it much. But you can take an old sock and just snap off the foot, make a hole in the side so that you can accommodate your fingers. And then use this to keep your hand in so that when you are doing pencil shading, especially, your palm does not deposit too much of oil onto the paper. Now, the shading over here is excellent practice for what we call contour lines. A contour line is a line that follows the edge. And trying to keep your hand steady and in one place and sideways, try moving your fingers up and down. Avoid making lines like this because this is a very unsteady way of making vertical lines. This is a good way to make horizontal lines. So hold your pencil far away enough so that you see more of the picture and then just make strokes at random, all coming or converging towards the center. Now make them light enough so that we can imitate the texture that we are trying to imitate. And once you are confident with your texture, start making some dark lines even before the texture is completed. Now, one might think that it's fairly easy to just make this texture. It is. But then whenever you get something that's easy enough, that's where you can focus on the details of the texture itself. So if you look closely, there are some specks in the in this material. There are some damaged parts which can be just made by pressing the pencil a little more. And there are some cuts on the yarn. And there's very subtle shadows at play. A little dark patch here, extending all the way up. And this place, in fact, if you have a slightly rough finish, will look better. So we don't need smooth lines. We need more lines to be seen. So pay mind to the highlights. Even though they're few, they are still present. And the material looks nicer for the highlights in the right place, shadows in the right place, shadows sometimes which are soft edged, sometimes hard edged. And now here we need to translate the various browns into gray. So you will have at least 2 tones of light brown and 2 tones of dark, like the dark over here. Then you have the edge of this piece. Slightly darker background with a nice deep shadow here. And then just to check whether you're getting it right, choose one nice dark shadow in the vicinity and shade that. That dark tone will give you like a baseline for how dark you can go. Now, if you look at the detail, right now this looks very smooth. It could be anything from cotton to silk to even straw. But how do you make it look like straw? So there will be a few blemishes. And those blemishes, however subtle, will communicate to the viewer that this is definitely not a bunch of silk threads that we have tied together. So just use your pencil very lightly and make few dark marks in a few places. Is everyone getting this? Simple enough.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. This piece in the bottom, the second part, B1, has got a very interesting texture running through it. Now, when you encounter something like that, I would suggest please go for it. Make that texture. Don't hide behind this smooth texture. Give it a shot. Now, at this point, I'd like to ask how many of you find that your lines are sharp or are they blunt?
I'm doing a combination of both,
Okay.
but mostly blunt.
Yeah, so yesterday I noticed some of the pictures that I was seeing that many times our line is very, very thick and it doesn't have a sharpness to it. So I want all of you to see if you can hold the pencil a little lighter. I'm going to try and show you what I mean over here. So when you're drawing with a heavy hand, your line comes like this. Even if you're drawing it like the line that I always tell you not to draw, this is quite a heavy line. In contrast, if you hold the pencil slightly upright and just barely touch the pencil, you might get a line that is, even if I make it dark, you will still get a certain sharpness to the line. So the difference is how you are employing pressure to make that mark on paper. If you are making lines like these, you will be left with shapes that are very thick edged, and you won't get some subtle shapes. How do I show this? Okay. No, maybe this. So it's a much thicker line than it ought to be. So try holding the pencil away, holding it upright, so that you get a much sharper line. It's thinner and crisper. You know what I mean? I hope I'm communicating what that
Yeah. I have been doing the same thick line mistake that you just showed. So I know exactly what you mean.
Okay, good. Okay, so try to hold the pencil upright in the places where we need more detail. Since there is this very curious texture in this part of the segment, it would help to hold the pencil upright and make a few lines which are very light, sharp, and thin. And in this also, when you're shading it, try to look for an edge that is sharp, even if you're holding it sideways. Now, this particular texture is very different from these straight lines that we are drawing. And we can, of course, ignore that texture exists and not draw it at all, or draw everything else around it and then try to recreate the shadows. So the shape can be a little wonky, but if you try and see what it is doing, it's probably just some either main stem or maybe one edge of the leaf. God knows what it is. But we definitely see some mid-tone shadows. So I see a rectangular shape towards the bottom. Then next to that, I'll see a square shape with a little white space left in between. Then you have a segment running through. So I'm literally looking at the shape that I can discern and recreating that. And within that neighborhood, then whatever I can recreate in that shape with that line and the particular corresponding tone, I proceed from the known to the unknown. And you will find that the texture is emerging. So I would often wonder in the beginning, if I wanted to draw something like that, do I need to study the material to know what this is? And I spent a lot of time in researching why I would have this, and you can imagine how difficult that might have been. And then I realized that even if I do not know what it is, I can see it. And that's good enough for an artist. If you can see it, you can draw it. So in places like this, it helps to fill in the texture in the direction that you see the texture. You might see some horizontal lines in some places, then moving into some vertical lines. So try to look for that internal texture line also if you can. Now here's one interesting thing that happens at this joint. You won't see one hard line that gives you shadow. It's all very fuzzy. So it's going to, the texture of the shading has to be done a little bit like how we did the shading in yesterday's fabric. So you gently shade from dark corners towards the outside. And in a lot of cases, you will go around some of the fiber so that it starts looking more rounded. And in order to do that, first give yourself that texture of the fibrous membrane. And then this is how you will fill in the shadows. Just inside this and around it. And this is an interesting technique to use when we go to rope, because here the shadows give legitimacy to this texture. Now, conversely, if I take a shape like this, It won't look wrong, it will look like something else. So I do the same texture here. And this is the braid on top of it. If I just give a shadow like this, it really doesn't do much for the object. Let's assume this is how it is. But if I were to round this off, then the bottom looks like it is circular, because that is how shadows would fall. And then within that, if I do a gentle shadow around each of these lines, they will look like separate segments of this segment. So I've exaggerated it a little bit over here so that you can see it. But if I make it more subtle, all that is communicated to the brain is a rope-like structure where you've taken multiple objects and then twisted them and roped them. Now here you can see I have started the texture from somewhere very random and moved upward. This is because as I traveled down this path, I couldn't get a single stronghold. I couldn't get any one shape that I could see and sketch. So I started with whatever I could see, and that was this rectangular shade over here. And now from there, now everything else starts becoming a little more easy. So I proceeded up, and now I'm coming down. And suppose you do all this and then you still can't see the shapes in the complicated shapes in some of the area, just match the tone. Even here, some of these will be rounded out shadows. It is so subtle, it might feel like that's just too much detailing. But that is the difference between those really impressive, hyper-realistic sketches we see on the net. And then we look at our sketches and we feel something is missing. It's the tiny details that count. Now also here, there's a little bit of a highlight along this edge. So maintain that highlight almost all the way to the bottom. And around that highlight, you have a darker texture. So by now, with all this shading, where you want lines, there's a good chance that you're getting very smooth texture. That's the irony. Now that we want lines, they will be hard to come by. But it's an easy solution. Just rotate the pencil a little bit, and you will find that the other edge will give you, any other side will give you a hardish edge. But do remember that when you are shading, avoid shading lines which have a defined top and bottom like this. Shade either in one direction like this, so that you start off with a very wispy end and end in a very wispy end, so that when you are shading a certain section back and forth, the ends are not ending in the edges are not ending in a sharp point, a sharp shape, because that builds up. This can be grown and made into a very amorphous shadow. The hand needs to move very lightly. Okay, everyone good with this? Shall we move on to the basket? All right.
Can I show you?
Yeah. Okay, let me pin it. Okay, very nice. More lines in between, Shivani. I think that should do. Again, your mid-tones are missing. So add more lines which are not too dark and not too light, somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
That should do. Let's see Ritu's. Okay, very good. Yeah, so you're getting all the tones. But Ritu, tell me something. Are you holding your pencil sideways or are you holding it upright?
Sideways, Aditi.
Okay. Are you holding the book with your left hand? Or are you holding your phone?
No, no, I'm holding the book.
Okay. So then the lines are still looking a little heavy. So I want
Okay.
you to find
I
a
think my
way-
pencil is very blunt, Aditi.
Okay, then try sharpening it and then use a very light hand to make all the lines. Don't be tempted to, it won't be temptation. Our hands are used to putting a lot of pressure because of how we write, but you might have to backtrack a little bit.
So you want lighter strokes.
Yeah, lighter strokes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Thanks.
Let's see, Tarini.
Check out. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's a similar problem.
Yeah.
Lines are a little thicker. So
Heavy.
sharpen your pencil and see. One
Okay.
of the reasons why you might get these blunt looking lines is also that if your pencil has not been used, then I don't know, it tends to become coated or something, and it does not release the graphite as freely as it normally does. So just a little bit of a rub with your sharpener should do the trick. It removes that coating, or just use something abrasive to clean the lead.
Okay. Thank you.
Aditi, I think the strokes will come better even if we hold the pencil slightly straighter,
Hmm.
isn't it?
Yeah, so that's the thing. There is a rhythm to how you will hold the pencil. Sometimes you will hold it straight to make the sharper lines, but I hold the pencil sideways even to make the sharper lines because I want to see a large part of the illustration.
I put mine on the group.
Okay.
It's still like very halfway because I'm doing it very deliberately. I'm trying to get the line
Huh.
thick and thin.
Okay.
So I'm going a little slow. So I
Yeah.
will just see.
Yeah. I'm looking at it. It's going well. Can everyone else also just put your pictures on the group, because then I can see it better than on screen. So again, check all of you, if you're holding your breath when you're making the liner, it could be very involuntary now after all these months, that you just take a quick breath and do the line and then do a because the lines are looking so heavy. I can't, I don't know why. By now they should be a lot less encumbered. So it might be happening very subconsciously. All right, so let's move on to making the basket itself. Now that you know how textures are made, we will make the basket texture slightly different a slightly simplified form of this kind of texture. We are obviously not going to make the detail that we have done over here. This one you can complete later. And think of this as an exercise to lighten your hand. Even if you don't get an accurate texture, that is fine. We have got the shape right. That was a focal point based on the grid, how to draw all the lines. The texturing bit will come over time as your hand becomes lighter and lighter, and you start understanding how the tip of the pencil works. So now which basket? 1 second. Okay, so we have these 3 baskets. Oh, sorry. And you can see how the textures are different in all these. This looks like a, I guess, a cane basket, very beautiful. This is not cane. This is similar to the material that we used. Could be banana fiber, pineapple fiber, jute even, I think. And
It's
then,
more banana or pineapple, Aditi.
and
Hmm.
then this is, I think, wicker, which is probably also a vine. So depending upon what you want to illustrate any of these work, let's try making this basket because it has got fewer additional elements. It does not have a handle and a weave, right? And over here also we have a handle made out of wood and sorry, a rim made out of wood and a handle also made out of probably a fatter cane. Eventually you can try these also. I love drawing baskets, especially when you have like 8 hours to kill. Take up a basket. Basket or a building with windows. Time well spent. Now, when we look at this object, notice how this is pretty much like any other cylindrical object. There is light from one side, shadows from the other, and then the surface is broken up into smaller sections, and each of those sections will also have a highlight section, especially on the middle right, and then shadow. And as we move towards the left, there will be slightly deeper colors or tone. The tone will be slightly medium tone, and the shadows might be a little sharper or bigger, even if they're medium tone. So the manner of drawing this is first just replicate the cylinder shape and then start making the various lines and then start making the texture in that. It's a very tedious job. A very quick job of that would be to just make a few lines here and there and finish it off. But I like to make all the textures. When we make this, we will divide the cylinder into a number of lines horizontally and then also vertically so that we know where each of those segments is going, and then we will draw a weave. I suspect the sketching of this is going to be as long as it takes to make the damn basket. So it's so much fun though, if you enjoy it. By the end of it, your hand will start moving a lot better also.
So Aditi, if you want to get the fine detailing correct and with as much
Accuracy.
accuracy, then should you make it slightly a bigger image or a small image?
No, so what don't restrict yourself to only making details in large images. Because if you say if you want to make an illustration for a card and you still want to show this detail, you should be able to do this. Now we've done a detailed texture, right? So you know how to do that one. To practice this texture, you can do a detailed illustration, but the applications of that are very few. For the basket itself.
Basically, like when we were learning calligraphy, we first started with drawing the things in a large thing and then reduce the size of the font once we've got the curve. So
Right.
similarly, just so that we can see the lines that we are drawing clearly, like in a small space, they tend to get merged and all that. But in a larger space, you would be able to draw each line slightly more clearly and see where you're placing it. So that way I was asking.
We can give it a shot. So right now, what I'm going to make is slightly larger also. It's not going to
Okay.
be very tiny,
Ah.
but the detail is not going to be as much as you think it is. But when we finish it, you will perceive it in as much detail as we see it. So that is what I wanted to get to.
Okay.
Okay, let's define the size of our basket. You can make it fairly large. In the picture that you have, depending upon the device that you're seeing the reference image in, you can see something as small as this or as large as this. Let's go for a bigger size basket. Here also proportion does count. So I'll do a little drawing of proportion to understand how we can go about it. Oh, sorry, let's share screen. Yeah. Now, even in this case, I always rely on regular shapes. So square works. And then again, break it up into more parts to know exactly where everything else fits. So we have a half mark, a 1/4 mark, and a 1/8 mark. So the bottom part of the basket is, I guess, 1/8 up to this point, and then slightly short of 1/8 up to this point. So to what degree you want to do this detail is generally up to you, but I like to practice proportioning, even if the object is as simple as a basket. Now divide the circle, square in half, and this will give us the proportion for the sides of the basket. Half, quarters, and then 1/8.
Aditi, is there, can we make it simpler, proportioning?
Can we make it simpler?
Yeah.
We can. Do you have any idea?
Just a full rectangle and then dividing it up kind of thing.
Yeah, we can do that. But the reason why I don't use a rectangle is because a rectangle has two variables. You will
Yeah.
need to know vertical and horizontal,
Mm.
and the difference between the two. And I've often found that we tend to see rectangles very differently. So when we're drawing them with a square, it's whatever is horizontal is it's
Yeah.
vertical. So it becomes easier, whether it's a small square or a big square, it's just relative. But when it comes to rectangle, it can go a little, there are still some measurements that you are not sure about. But let's go about it. Let me just try doing it.
No, I think my struggle is mainly because there's a grid and just below the grid, there's a very dense pattern. So
Huh?
it's a little visually challenging, to fit the
Oh.
grid with the pattern below.
So, is this, you're saying this when you have to draw the image from the grid, or when you have to make the
No,
grid
when
on the?
when I'm trying to understand why you're doing so many boxes while proportionating.
So the thing is that we can just, firstly, we can obviously draw this without any proportions and just wing the image.
Eyeball it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I wanted to show you how the internal geometry also helps you to make the most accurate
Okay.
illustration.
From that point of view, okay, I'll try to understand. Yeah.
That's about it. But now when you're drawing it, we go backwards. We first draw the square to completely ignore the basket and just pay
Okay.
attention to the red part of it.
All
At
right.
this point, you don't even have to consider that a basket is being made. We are just drawing the vertical, horizontal lines, the squares. And after that is done, then we will draw a little bit of the shape of the basket, none of the detail also. So it's just going to be the oval on top, the lines on the side, and the curve at the bottom. Then we will remove everything and then remove the grid lines, and then we will make the texture.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so let's start with making that square. Let's make the square about this size. Use some reference to make your square equal. And just make perfunctory lines because you know we have to erase these. Divide it in half. Oh, 1 minute. I haven't shared the image. Okay, so I've shared it on this on the group. I've made a square, divided it vertically and horizontally in half. I'm dividing the top half into quarter and 1/8. So this will give us the proportion of the oval on top. Sometimes even drawing this oval can be a challenge. Now we're going to draw this later. Take this measurement from the top, just this 1/8, bring it down over here so you know where the base, how the base is going to come. The same measurement, a slightly shorter, will be the bottom of the basket. Now we'll divide the, again over here, you don't have to draw the full line. Just divide the top in halves into quarters. And then from here, extend the line, maybe just make a dotted line all the way to the second line from the bottom, because here is where the oval can come. Sorry, yeah, quarter, 1/8. So you can already see the basket in this shape. Does this help, Tarini?
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is, yeah.
Okay. Now I've drawn the grid very light so that I can show you how I will draw the basket in this first. So I'm just making an oval shape, not too dark. This is not the final mouth of the basket. And making 2 straight lines from the side. There is a shape to the side as well. And then coming inside, I'm making the base this rounded. Now this way we will avoid making all sorts of funny proportions that I'm sure all of you must have encountered trying to make a simple basket. I know I have made some baskets which are very wide or very tall, or worse, crooked baskets. You can see that this basket is already crooked also. So I can make this adjustment here. So this is a common problem with objects which are symmetrical. All right, now if you can see through the grid, great. If you can't, you can remove all the horizontal and vertical lines that are supporting our basket. And also look at the original image of the basket, not the one with the grid. Now, here are certain details that we find difficult to draw. This object will look two-dimensional unless we give it some kind of sense of depth perception. The best thing to do is to draw the depth in the rim. That is where you actually see it if you allow yourself. So the rim is drawn as two interwoven or interlocking C's which don't connect. Every cylindrical object that you draw, potentially you will see it like that, but you want it to look three-dimensional. So you break this up and give it a thickness. You will make a C shape horizontally, and then a corresponding larger shape that goes around the C, hugs the two edges, and then from here you bring the sides down and make a base. Now, depending upon the thickness of this area, you can tell what material it is. Even if it is a steel object, which is relatively thin, the rim is pretty thin, you can still make something like this and make it look more three-dimensional. And then, of course, comes the shading. So in the case of the basket, we have a rather thick edge, and you don't really see it except for the shadow. So what you will see is the inside or the top edge in the foreground of this oval that goes to the sides, and then it goes into some kind of shadow and a texture like that. But beyond this line is where the bottom of the back of the basket begins. There's a slight overlap of lines, just this much, and this is usually enough to convince the eye that this is a round object. The rest is just an oval you draw around this oval because it's a woven rim. But don't draw it too dark because in this we have to create a texture. So you can start this texture from the center if you want. And one way that you might be tempted to do is just draw lines like that. But start with one. There will be one section in the center where you will see this very bulbous shape. And a little bit of the basket is going over. So I'm going to draw only the top and the sides, and then from there you will see these same shapes coming, bending towards the left as you go towards the left. So this has to be in the darkened line. Now remember that they are not C shapes, all of them, and they're not identical shapes. So don't make them the same C shape. This is the best part about drawing any organic material. It is very conducive to hand drawing. So your shapes will become, each of these shapes will keep looking different. As you start moving towards the middle of the left, the shapes will start becoming thinner. Some of the shapes might also change to a tapering shape, as I can see here in some places. And they're just following this rim. And then right towards the end, you can see more of the top and the sides than the bottom. And they become much closer so that towards the side, you can only see the tops and a very filled up texture. And now on the right, it still seems to be bending towards the left for some distance. So do what the illustration is telling you to do. Don't imagine anything. It is possible that because it has been woven from one side, it is going to be slightly lopsided towards the bottom left. They may not all be vertical segments. Here there are some segments which are flat also. And some again you don't see the bottom of, so don't bother drawing that. Just draw the top and the sides. Now it straightens out over here. Now here there's a big knotted something. It's probably the joint. And then the same treatment that we did towards the end over here. Everything becomes closer and you see more of the top. And you can continue this going behind. Are you getting this?
Yes.
Not an issue, no, everyone? Okay. All right. Yesterday it was wrong. Now, if you want to do a very like nitpicky detail, you will notice that this texture in the back is out of focus. So making an out of focus illustration is just making multiple lines and very light lines. So automatically the edges look a little fuzzy. So this is what you should not be doing. You can do over here. This is the place where you can use your blunt pencils. Now, a little care needs to be taken along the sides. Since we have two parallel lines, the temptation to convert this into a texture might be really high. These are two parallel lines, right? So if you're doing this, then you are basically just making a doodle texture over there. And this will look like a graphic basket. It will still look like a basket, but maybe not very authentic. So what I would have you do instead is, these are just guidelines, but think of your line wrapping around this. So look at each segment in its has its own identity. So you go around, which is the part that goes behind. Then visualize part that comes from behind, goes over here, and then goes under. Then there's another part that comes from there. So it is not this, or it is not even, it's not like this also. It's not a, it's just a tiny difference in how you approach the object. So you might find that it's slightly flat on the top, a little rounded towards the ends, and that will make it look more three-dimensional. And then also some places the texture might not be fully visible, like along the sides. But you still have to give it its three-dimensional quality. So it comes from underneath and goes around and then goes over. Okay, can you see the difference between these two? All right, so we can continue the rest. Actually, let me just take a minute and finish this off. At any time, if you come across a basket weaving workshop, I would encourage you all to do it. It's a wonderful experience. All right, now the way I would make this basket is I would actually count all the different horizontal and vertical sections. So we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Sorry, 2, 5, 6. $28. So we have 28 lines across, and we have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lines vertical. Okay, here's how we go about it. First, let's tackle the number 11. There's one, we don't have to make them equidistant, so it doesn't matter. This line is usually vertical, the one that is most center, but it's not exactly in the center, it's little to the right. So we make this mostly vertical. And then you have its width, that's about this large. And now we need to make 5 segments or sections on the right, 5 on the left. And the first 3 can be slightly wideish, but they are diminishing in their width. And they also come closer towards the bottom, so that you have the last 2 reasonably narrow strips. Same thing over here. And the line turns inward ever so slightly towards the bottom. Now, in case you make 12, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. In case you make 10, that's also fine. And now from here, I prefer to do the division equally as far as possible. So now I can divide this into half, and dividing a piece into 28 is quite a lot of work. So let's see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now each of these sections, if I divide them into 3, I'll get 24. Some of the bigger sections I can divide into 4 and I will get 28. The important point over here is to be able to see the texture as a grid. Now, Tarini, are you able to see that in this? Or would this also be confusing? So we have created somewhat the texture that we want. And now we just have to furnish the details. So here the details are a little easier to fill except for the overlap parts. So start from the lines that you don't see overlap. Like over here, we have one not overlapping. The grid is given completely. So the body of the object or the material fits in the main part, but the ends taper into the neighboring area. And keep looking at your reference image. And the end is always a little bulbous. Avoid making any of these shapes without looking at the reference image. In the event that you forget which is which, and as you go down, that's okay. But look at the shape, any shape, and draw that on your, in that space to get a good, more accurate line. Ah, so satisfying. I love this. You can spend your whole Sunday now filling out this basket. And I can guarantee this will be a very satisfying experience. And of course, the shading remains exactly like how we had shaded the detail. So you can notice how the textures are and just make these darkened lines. And you'll see that you really don't need to do anything more than that. You can add an additional texture in places where we have shadows and leave the sections which have a highlight without any pencil shading at all. The same thing goes for the rim as well. Now, when it comes to the back,
Aditi, sorry,
Yeah.
I had to take an urgent call. I missed
Oh,
a bit.
no problem.
Did you divide the basket vertically from the center, or is it the sides of the center, the middle two lines?
No. So from the center, I made this central section first. And then I started moving to the sides, turning the line a little, slanting it a little bit. And then as I made the next three sections wide,
Yeah.
and then the last two sections narrow.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Progressively diminishing.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, now for the back of the basket, the texture is pretty much the same, but it's not as easily visible. It's not that clean. So you can mark a few things if you want, if you feel the need to. Or because this is such a small section, you could just make the texture very organically and fill it out. Now in this place, it will help if you have a guard sheet. So that you don't mess up your pencil lines. and you shade this whole thing, you give it all a texture. As you see it. And then after that is done, you can shade some of this holy gray. Like you would maybe a metal container also.
This feels very meditative.
It is. I'm telling you, it will be a very well spent Sunday if you manage to do it through the day. Okay, a little more dark shadows, and then this will look more three-dimensional. Okay, any questions? It's already 11:30.
Very nice.
So I think you should be able to do the rope also pretty much the same way. You will draw the shape of the outline of the rope, and then you will be able to fill in the texture.
I think every time we do it, it gets better the more we do it.
Good, good. More than anything, I like that when you do a lot of similar texture throughout, your hand starts becoming much stronger. It's like doing reps in gym. I'm
Yeah.
assuming I've been to a gym very infrequently, but I keep seeing all those guys keep doing all sorts of stuff. So little movement, little strength in parts of your fingers will make all the difference. And by the end of it, then when you start drawing the rope, I think you will start seeing that your hand moves a lot easier. Cool. So now next month we are going to start artists, and we will start with Van Gogh as usual. So if there are any interesting paintings or something that you want to recreate, please send them. We can I can have a look at those and we can recreate those. Okay. All right. Okay. I'll see you next Saturday.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Have a great Sunday.
Yeah, have a nice Sunday.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.